Hello! Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I got some great feedback from the Battlefront 2 beta review video, so I really hope you guys enjoy this one. So let's get into it. I was lucky enough to receive a code for the UFC 3 beta, and being a huge UFC fan and a lover of the previous game, I was very excited to see what was going to be on offer. Ollie and I have both played tons of UFC 2 and we both love it. For me personally, it's not just one of my favourite sports games, but it's actually up there with my favourite fighting games of all time. The controls, the system, the balance, it all makes sense. It's definitely not without its issues, but those issues were things I was hoping would be easy fixes for this upcoming game. Unfortunately, I have to say, instead of deal with the tiny issues, EA have proven once again that if something ain't broke, don't fix it. So firstly, I want to share with you what was in the beta, and then I'll get stuck into what I think the main issues with it are. So like with most betas, we were given a snippet of the full game, but could also see what we weren't getting in the menu screens. Firstly, and most importantly, we were given access to the Fight Now mode. Of course, Conor McGregor had to be in it, meaning the one weight class we got to experience was the lightweight division. Speaking of Conor, what on earth is this? Why does he look worse than he did in the last game? Look at his pecs, they look like a paintbrush stroke for God's sake. The beta had a pretty good selection of fighters, most of which were competitors in recent UFC events. Also available in the beta was a practice mode, which for such a dense fighting system was important. An online fight was also available, and finally a taster of an updated Ultimate Team mode was also there. I will say now, I haven't played much of the Ultimate Team mode because I was trying to focus on the changes to the gameplay, so if you're looking for comment on that, I do apologise. So my initial response to the gameplay was confusion. As I just mentioned, UFC 2's fighting system was a very deep one, with a lot of things to learn and wrap your head around. Having played so much of that game, the controls and the systems were very much embedded in my long-term memory, so when I was met with changes, I found it very difficult to adjust. My gut instantly told me something was wrong because for starters, the controls had very needlessly changed. I convinced myself for fairness sake that I need to play more because I was just trying to relearn something. Unfortunately, my gut was right. See, in UFC 2, the control system made perfect sense. The shoulder buttons were used for associating to your upper and lower body. R1 was defense of your head, and R2 was defense of your body and legs. On the opposite side, L1 was for targeting moves to your opponent's head, and L2 was for targeting their body. This makes sense because the L and R1 buttons are above the buttons for the body. The height automatically associates in your brain and it makes sense. Therefore, you have a completely intuitive system to work off of. Still following? Good. In this game, blocking your head is controlled by R2, which is a complete switch. Blocking your body is now assigned to R2 and L2, 2 buttons. This makes blocking your body a lot more difficult, and you now have one less finger to concentrate on your next move. Attacking wise, there are even more changes. There are now 2 buttons for targeting your opponent's head, one for simply targeting, and one for a signature style move. L2 is still for body attacks, but for some reason these are much slower, meaning stringing variable combos together is almost impossible. One nice change that they've made, and I must admit it's one of the only changes I'm really happy with, is the fact that you can now slip and dodge while you're moving. This means that on the way in or out of attacking, you can slip punches and work your way around your opponent's offense. This works great and it creates some brilliant moments of realistic MMA skill. Finally, your offensive moveset is no longer assigned to directional controls on the analog stick, and this means that different moves are not only much harder to remember, but it also takes more time for a player to do them. Pressing X and flicking the analog stick left is a lot quicker than holding down X and square while also pressing R1 and L1 and trying to move in the right direction. The reason for this change is because the new game has apparently been built from the ground up using something called real player motion, which puts a much greater emphasis on player movement. In my opinion though, it's far too much. Range is now a much bigger part of each fight, and with kicks being a lot slower and fewer in number, that's a big deal. Furthermore, there's far too much movement now because most of the time, fighters can't even reach one another at all. Even the AI is swinging air most of the time, and that's not because of your slipping or dodging, it's because by the time you've thrown a punch, your opponent is already gone. It almost feels like an increased latency issue, and that goes for creating combos as well. Okay, sorry, I know that was probably quite a tough explanation to sit through, so thank you if you're still following or if you haven't clicked off the video. But these things honestly make a huge difference to the game. It feels so unresponsive in terms of attacking and far too responsive in terms of defending. For clarification, I'm not the only one who's bothered by this. In the forum for feedback on the beta, most of the posts are negative and most of them are complaining about the new control scheme. Right, so now that I've covered what was good about the last game and is being ruined by this one, I want to go over some of the things that were bad about the last game and have actually been made worse by this one. So much for easy fixes. So another thing that EA has obviously tried to do in this game is encourage people to use the grappling and submission systems more. Not that they were bad in the last game, just completely outshone by the striking. The way they've done this is by making the stats and stamina a little bit more important. Stamina, which we'll come to in a bit more detail in a minute, is now used up a lot more easily, especially on the ground. The stats are now more meaningful. This is a problem because if you're in a stand-up fight with someone who has better striking stats than you, it can be dangerous, but it's still a fair fight, and if you're skillful enough, you can still win. On the ground, however, it's the complete opposite. Fighting Nurmagomedov or Tony Ferguson, better hope they don't try and take you down because you will be caught there for the rest of the round while you run out of stamina from one pass and they crawl all over you. The worst part about this is, it's not even fun. At least in the last game, you felt like there was some knowledge advantage to wrestling. If you move to the right position, you can navigate to your feet or a dominant position. But in this game, you can't do that because your stamina runs out. So I hope you enjoy whole rounds of waiting for that submission minigame. That brings me on to stamina. In UFC 2, if you play like Rocky Balboa and swing without rest, you will lose the fight. In UFC 3, if you go for a combo of any kind, you will run out of stamina. Seeing as stamina is also linked to health, chances are you will also concede a health event and almost get knocked out. Seeing as combos are now slower, this means that you have to throw more to hit your opponent. And since distance is an issue, you hit your opponent less, so you have to swing more. And then you get knocked out. See how this whole vicious cycle links back to the control scheme in the movement system? Lastly, this brings me on to health events. Undoubtedly, one of the worst things about UFC 2 is the random health events and sometimes even more random knockouts that happen. You could be pounding someone to death for an entire 5-round fight, and then they hit you once with a big move, and suddenly you're on the ground and Joe Rogan is freaking out. In this game, it's even worse because it's more frequent than before. Here are some examples of me winning a round and landing plenty of hits on my opponent, and then boom, I'm suddenly in trouble because I got hit with a jab. One upside is that during health events, you don't do that weird arm swinging thing like you did in the last game. You make like a real human and run towards your opponent. But again, better hope you're not getting ground and pounded because the defense for that is still awful. Same goes for getting kneed in the head in the clinch. Don't try to defend it because the fight is probably over. So look, I'm as annoyed as you probably are if you're a fan of UFC 2. UFC was one of the only redeeming qualities EA had. It's not an annualized game, UFC 2 was brilliant, and it doesn't have a greedy reliance on microtransactions. Unfortunately, this is a very familiar seeming EA. Here was a game that a lot of people liked. All they had to do was some roster updates and some small fixes and the game would have been great. Instead, they fix something that isn't broken by completely rehashing it to make less sense. And they showcase the same arrogance that they did with Battlefront 2. This is a brand with loyal followers, so if we slap that label on it, they're gonna buy it and they're gonna enjoy it. We don't need to give them what they want because this will sell on its own. I very much hope that EA are listening to the community's feedback and choose to do some real work before bringing this game out. Because from this beta, I can't really recommend this game to anyone. Buy the previous game that is considerably cheaper and is still a better game and isn't actually that outdated. So thank you all so much for watching. If you agree or disagree with anything I've said here, please let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, make sure you subscribe and tune in next time.